Hi, Grandpa. After my last transmission, I noticed you're starting to look for other voices, people from your own time, to help you make sense of the messages I'm sending. I'm seriously trying my best to make my transmissions as accessible as possible for someone living 100 years ago. But sometimes it's hard to remember every concept and every technology you didn't know back then. So honestly, I love the idea of you reaching out to brilliant minds from your time to help fully grasp what I'm trying to share. I thought I could help with that. In your time, you had something called the internet, a sprawling, beautiful, but often overwhelming sea of information. Today, we search through something we call the A field, or Akashic field. It's similar. It includes everything you once made accessible through your internet, but much more. And it's way more coherent. No data pollution, no endless noise. After my recent recording, I scanned the field and found someone you might want to connect with to better understand what I'm sending today. Look for someone called Tomer Strolight. In your time, he was already trying to tell the deeper story of Bitcoin, not just as money, but as a mirror. He wrote a book called Why Bitcoin that helped people understand its spiritual and philosophical roots. Tomer talked about freedom, values, time, and truth in ways that echoed what we now live. He served as the editor-in-chief at Swan Bitcoin, a leading Bitcoin financial services company, and even made a short film called Bitcoin is Generational Wealth. He wasn't just making the case for a protocol, he was helping people find their integrity and purpose. He would be a great fit to understand and discuss my today's message. Hey, Grandpa! I just came back from the purpose ritual for my friend Nail's son. He turned 11 last week. You wouldn't believe what that means here. At that age, each child sits in what we call the listening circle, a multi-day gathering where community members reflect back their essence. We all share moments when we've seen their spark. For example, how they calm others, how they solve conflict, or how they light up around plants. And the child, they just listen, not to be praised, but to remember. Later, they sit with their resonance mentor and write their first alignment journal about what they have noticed inside that wants to move outward. They're 11 and they already know more about their internal compass than most adults from your time. That's school now. Visiting this ritual made me think, your schools, Grandpa, they aren't preparing people for the next disruption. You taught facts and answers. We teach what to do when the answers break. Please, if you hear this, start building schools that teach skills, not just knowledge. Start building them around purpose, not performance. Because when machines take over most of the physical and mental work, humans won't know who they are unless someone shows them how to look inward. If you keep telling children their value is in productivity, in test scores, in grind and growth, then this next wave will break their minds. Not because they're weak, but because they'll be measuring themselves against something that doesn't sleep, doesn't doubt, doesn't feel. Machines won't kill your world, Grandpa, but miseducation might. Talk soon, Grandpa.
Yes, awesome. Now we're back. And I say hello again. Thank you very much for joining. Like I said before, watching your first episode on Bitcoin for Millennials really opened up a gate for me, seeing that in the Bitcoin space, there are many people like touching on topics like consciousness, purpose, spirituality. And so I thought, let's invite him. And welcome.
Well, your granddaughter seemed to think that I should be invited.
Also,
Right, fair.
yeah,
Sending her transmission from the year 2140.
yeah, and because you talked about the topic of purpose. I always like to first of all understand how would you describe purpose? What actually is that for you?
Well, that's a really good question. I wasn't necessarily ready for that, but I think purpose is what you decide is your drive, is your main point. What fulfills you, what completes you, what interests you. It's kind of like something that you pull out of it comes from within. It's all of the different things that are fascinating for you and important to you, and that then combine to be a purpose. So, once you have a family, for example, this health and success of your family becomes a very important part of your purpose. But if you make the decision that you want to become an engineer, studying the fundamentals of engineering and being excellent at that becomes a purpose. So purpose is very much a goal that can be attained, and then is a stepping stone towards a deeper, broader purpose. And I find in life that I think that's really the journey as you go. There are times when you have no purpose, and so you're kind of lost and floating adrift. But then you find something that attracts you and that you commit your energies to, and you work at it. And sometimes it might be a lifelong thing that you're just continuously improving at. But oftentimes there are milestones along the way, and when you get to one, it's to explore the world once again as a blank slate, saying, I now have achieved this goal. What's my next purpose? What's my next step? What's my next direction? And many times those are small journeys, like if you have a job and it's very fulfilling and it's purposeful, but it ends for whatever reason, the company goes out of business, you decide to leave. People leave jobs for lots of reasons. Then you're kind of looking for your next job. And I don't want to say your job is your purpose, but if you have a job that's very much aligned with your purpose, it's not a job at all. It's a calling.
Yeah, that's true. And especially for the job. So for me, it feels like a lifelong ride to really discover purpose. It's like, it's really interesting. Sometimes it's very tough, I need to say. And I came along a definition, I will butcher that for sure. So when you have passion for something, you will do whatever it takes and nothing can stop you.
Right.
If you have a talent for something, it feels light, no matter how hard it is. And it's at the intersection of this two where we actually find purpose.
Right.
And for some reason that really resonated for me. I mean, I was looking for that. You're probably aware of the Ikigai method,
Yes. Yeah.
right?
Which is
Yeah. So when I dropped out of my last regular job 2 years ago, I really sat down and took months to go through all the processes and to really see, okay, where's my journey taking me? And actually, I discovered Bitcoin.
Yeah, Bitcoin awakens a lot of purposeful things in people because, one of our purposes is there's hierarchies of purposes or depth of purpose, right? Sometimes you find something that's deeply purposeful. Sometimes you find something that it's like, oh, I'm hungry. I got to get a meal. My purpose is to find my next meal. And Bitcoin plays into this thing that starts rather shallow. Like I want to make more money because I want to be able to buy stuff. And it starts to get deeper and deeper and deeper because it talks about the morality of money and the purposeness of a civilization that deals peacefully, where everyone deals peacefully with one another, where the use of force is directed towards securing property rather than taking property. And you just keep getting deeper and deeper and deeper. And eventually you hit something that becomes, not everyone does, but many people do. They hit something that becomes very spiritual, very pure about like, what is my true self? What is my essence? And Bitcoin allows you to go through a process of discovering that, in part because it detaches you from a world where your purpose is told to you, not by your inner reflections, but by others around you saying, look, people, they're selfish. You're one of them. The pursuit of money, fame, and power is what everybody is after. You should study hard, find a good job, make lots of money, buy lots of stuff, and be a good member of society by being a good consumer. And Bitcoin releases you from so many of those presumptions, and it shows you that they don't have to be true. As I wrote in one of my essays, that this is really why Bitcoin causes such a spiritual awakening, because when you hear the story of Bitcoin, Satoshi created something that the experts said couldn't be created, and he gave it as a gift. He didn't do it for money for himself. He didn't do it for power. He left all that power that he could have had behind. He didn't do it for fame. He was pseudonymous, right? None of us know who he was. And so when you hear this story, whether it comes out explicitly or not, even implicitly you see, well, here's a great genius who managed to break through something that our scientists believed was impossible, but managed to do it. And he didn't do it for money, power, or fame. And he was a
Hmm.
human being. So I'm a human being. So maybe I'm not greedy for money, power, and fame. And maybe I can do something that other people say I can't. And so it wipes the slate clean. It shatters all these myths that are told to us. And so the mythos of Bitcoin, which is a true story, it's not like a wonderful Disney movie that, someone rubs a magic lamp and this happens. Like, he did it in real life without magic. And that, I think, is one way that Bitcoin really opens people up to a whole new view of what it means to be human and what it means to be a member of a civilization following in the footsteps of such brilliance and innovative thinking about what it means to be a person.
Yeah, and actually for me it had exactly the opposite effect. Like hearing the story of Satoshi was one of the main reasons why I thought this is a fraud. This sounds like Ready Player One, the
Right.
movie.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like a true story, right? And if
Yeah.
it weren't for the fact that it really happened and every step of it is like recorded on the internet and you can see it, and
Mm.
and it hasn't been doctored or disturbed by 1,000 years of history. Like, we live in a time where it's true. So at first it may seem hard to believe. And so many things about Bitcoin at first seem hard to believe, but
Mm.
Bitcoin presents itself transparently and nakedly and says, you know, search for yourself, read the code, run the code, do your own research. Don't trust, verify. And it
Mm.
allows you to do all these things to it. And you eventually end up at this resonating thing of tremendous truth like you've never seen before, so true that you believe it can't possibly be true. I think I wrote something like, Bitcoin's too good to be false, is like one of the articles. It's just like, so
Yeah.
many things are too good, they sound too good to be true, and then along comes Bitcoin, and it's the only thing that sounds too good to be true, but ends up being truer than you even realized.
Yeah, and this maybe we will come back to that point later, because I find that fascinating, that truth, and that truth is actually, I think, the main reason why it moves so many people so deeply.
Mm-hmm.
And but maybe we take a step back. There might be some people who want to listen to that podcast who aren't even familiar with Bitcoin so far, not that deeply. So could you describe? Let's make it neutral, and we have a monetary system. However we call it, today we have a monetary system, and today we would agree that most people don't follow their purpose. So where do you see like the connections between the monetary system and purpose in the current system, in the global
Yeah.
current system? Let's put it that way.
Yeah. I think again, it's kind of ironic, right? Bitcoin is a system that's built with cryptography. Cryptography generally translates, like crypto translates to hiding.
Mhm.
And so we view it as keeping itself a secret. The monetary system we have tries to hide in plain sight. Like, all of its rules are obfuscated by central banks and bizarre speak, economic speak that most people don't understand and that isn't taught in school, right? Like,
Mhm.
you're taught in school a lot of things, but you're not taught who makes the money, why do they make it, what's the money supply. All these kinds of things are just never mentioned. They're not even mentioned in university. Like, I have 2 business degrees.
Mhm.
A lot of the macroeconomic stuff they try to teach, it never made sense, but they never once touched where does money come from. And it's kind of like, let's not talk about that. And when you do discover, to the best of our ability, of where it does come from, it it you discover why they don't talk about it, because it
Mm.
it is a form of theft. It's a form of fraud. It's a form of counterfeit, right? Like, money is printed for no effort by people who get it, who then mix it in with the money you worked for effort, and you put your time and money into earning something, your time and energy into something that took no time and energy to produce.
Mm.
And Bitcoin is fundamentally different as a monetary system in that Bitcoin takes time and energy to produce. Right? So
Mm.
it's more like, and this is why the analogy is to digital gold. it has differences from gold because it's the whole supply of it is verifiable and auditable, and it can be sent. It's not intangible, so it can be sent over the internet. But the fact that it takes time and energy to produce it aligns it with the nature of what human beings' work is, because work is simply a measure of time and energy, and your work, your time and energy is what you put in to chase your purpose. And so I think, to take it back to your question, and hopefully this doesn't sound like too strong a leap, it's our current monetary system steals your purpose from you by stealing your time and energy, from you, because it's you work hard that you could do something which would give you free time to pursue your purpose, to identify your purpose, to follow through on attaining your purpose. But 50% of that, maybe even more across the period of your lifetime, is taken away from you by the instrument that is printed and produced with no work or effort or time, right? And so I think that is the disconnect, the damage that our current monetary system has on people finding their purpose, even if and for many people that remains a very simple purpose. It's like, how do I pay my heating bills? How do I pay my food bills? How do I afford a home? And that becomes their purpose. They can't rise to a higher purpose where all those things have been made easy, because the inflation is ruining their purchasing power of the time and energy that they put into work. So you would think, at this time in history, with all of the productivity and increases that come from the industrialization of civilization and the computerization of civilization and the mass power production that we've got, if we were working 6 days a week back before industrialization, or 7 days for many people, shouldn't we be only working 2 days a week? Shouldn't we maybe even be working 1 day every other week with all this productivity gain? But we haven't been able to harness it, and we've gotten caught in this trap. And a lot of Bitcoiners, and myself included, believe that that outcome is really a factor of this government-controlled money, this connection between government and money, which leads to all sorts of fallacies, which I don't think this podcast is intended to go into. So I won't belabor it, because I know we want to get to the future, but we've been stuck, right? Despite all these amazing innovations and inventions, we still spend all this time pursuing the exact same things without being able to pursue a higher purpose, and with less security, in fact, in a lot of senses, right? Like, at least back when we worked 5 days a week before everything was industrialized and automated, we had some sense of job security. Things moved slower, but now we don't even have that, right? We've got robots coming, and it's only accelerating. We've got robots and intelligence agents, LLMs and all this AI and AI in robots. That's all coming at us. So it makes people pretty insecure about what they'll be able to do with their time. And it shouldn't, right? We should all, in theory, be applauding, oh my God, now I won't have to do all this work, and all the same amount of stuff will still be produced. In fact, we'll be able to take productivity 10 times higher. We should all be 10 times richer with having to do less work. We can really pursue our purpose. And yet we don't feel that way unless we're Bitcoiners. And so I think this is kind of where there's a turning point, or a moment of truth, where we cross over from one system into another, hopefully as peacefully as possible, and hopefully take as many people as we can as we do so.
Yeah, and I think one of the core messages is probably, once you're busy with surviving, because that's actually what it is, your whole nervous system is busy. There is no space, actually, right, for purpose, to ask any higher question. And I think purpose always has to do with very long-term thinking.
Yes.
So if you...
Well, the deeper sense of purpose, so the deeper the purpose, the longer time, right? But if your purpose is, it's freezing outside and I don't have any clothes on and I'm going to die of exposure, you're not thinking, what am I going to do 2 years from now? You're thinking, how do I survive the next 15 minutes?
Yeah, right. So that would be the extreme. So I need to do something so that I don't, let's say, a tiger, which is like, act now. Yeah. Freezing to death would give you maybe like 2 hours. It's a little bit longer, right?
Yes. Living in fiat society it's kind of becomes this week-long cycle of go to work, take a couple of days off, cash your paycheck, pay your bills. So somewhere between a week-long and a month-long cycle is what most people believe are focused on to some degree. There's a year-long focus, like I get a vacation every year and this particular holiday, or my birthday comes around every year, but you don't end up having a 20-year time frame thinking about things. You may have these purposeful endeavors like, oh, I'm going to college. It's going to be 4 years or 5 years or 3 years, whatever the duration of the program is. But so you set these multi-year goals. But, even when we talk about corporations, they're talking about quarterly results, right? Like, so these entities that are meant to, potentially be immortal are only thinking in terms of 3-month horizons, because that's the way that this financial system puts pressure on them to deliver a good quarter's results, because that's how often they're legally required to report their results.
Yep. So there's undeniably a correlation between time horizon and the sort of purpose you find.
Yes, exactly.
That makes sense.
Exactly.
So I think we don't get into like taxation and inflation. There are enough podcasts out there to talk about that. But one thing I think is very important: if you view your money, let's call it money for the simple purpose, and you store your life energy in that stuff, right? You work for it, you spend your time, and in exchange for a product, service, whatever, you get that token. We call it euro, dollar, whatever. And you have that, and you already did the job, and then it's vanishing. This gets you, through inflation or taxation as well. This gets you into a fight or flight or fear-based mode, and I think there is like you don't have the energy to dive into a 20-year horizon to ask, how am I going to be in 20 years?
I think one of the statistics that I heard, and I don't remember it precisely, so I'm not going to say the percentage, but a very significant percentage of people, when they're within 10 years of retirement, one of their biggest fears becomes that of outliving their money. They haven't been able to save enough. They see it that they've now caught on to inflation because they remember that a candy bar was 1/10 the price when they were kids, and so they're worried. Will a candy bar be 10 times the price it is when, or basic care for me, a basic meal when I'm retired, and so they end up working longer as part of the realization of it. So their vision of being able to retire goes away, but their worst fear is they're broke and old. And that is something that's really crept into our society. I mean, it might have been a big problem all along. Pensions were intended to solve it, but they don't work because of inflation, right? They're not indexed to true inflation, because even if you have one and you're lucky enough that's indexed to inflation, it turns out the inflation itself is a lie. The measured inflation is not the real inflation. And so people worry about this. And I can certainly say what a relief it's been to be involved in Bitcoin and saving in Bitcoin for a decade, because that's not my fear. I'm not living in fear of that. And in fact, I'm thinking the possibility of generational wealth is something that, as without me owning a factory or becoming some big millionaire or anything like that, I'll have money left over to give to my kids, which might appreciate enough that they could give to their kids if they choose to have any. So it's like, it's a real big pivot, and it's going to allow for a lot more people to do a lot more purposeful things with the back half of their lives, or the last third of their lives, depending on, when they attain this. And that's a time when they're the most productive intelligently, like they have the most wisdom. The longer you live, you can be very smart, but you don't really know how to use your smarts as efficiently as possible until you've misused them a lot of ways and used them a lot of ways that are effective. And that's where wisdom comes from. It comes from experience. And so if you're able to use that last chapter of your life wisely, because you're not panicked about money and you have resource, you can do a lot of good, and you're more likely to do a lot of good than a lot of harm at that point in your life. You're past the point where you're impetuous and young and all these, and have all these experiences that you still want to chase down. You're calmer and more, and you've raised your kids. So I think we end up with a wiser, elder, wealthier class that's different today. A lot of people are blaming the older generation, the boomers, for having taken everything and left nothing behind and made a worse world for their kids. And a big part of that, I think, is because they were caught up in the financialization of the world. And listen, they bought homes cheap when they were cheap, and it wasn't their policies that caused home prices to be financialized and inflated, but they benefited from it, and they don't know what to do to fix the system because nobody ever taught them what money was, and there are still many of them worried about outliving their money.
Yeah, definitely. And you said you're into it now a decade,
Yeah.
right? And could you describe, when you're looking back at the topic of purpose, how did it change you when entering the Bitcoin world?
Well, I think it opened up something that was very closed and unexamined. It opened up a very unexamined part of my life, which was my relationship to the nature of money. I'd been working, I'd done business degrees, so I was a business person, and I'd been working really hard to make as much money as quickly as I could and enjoy it while I was still young, but be able to save it for later. And when I came across Bitcoin, it started to show everything else that was really wrong with all the rest of the money in the world, because you could pursue a lot more money almost to infinity, right? There's no limit as to how rich a billionaire could get. We'll soon have trillionaires measured in dollars, and in many other currencies there's already multiple trillionaires because the currencies are worth so little relative to something like the dollar. But for me, it was first just, little drops at a time, like finding out that there can only be 21 million of these, first of all, following the equation, and then recognizing, well, if there's only 21 million of these and they become all the money in the world, well, there's a lot more than 21 million houses in the world. There's probably, 200 million houses just in the Western Hemisphere. So is every one of these going to be the equivalent of 10 houses? And that's just if it's only the housing market that this thing penetrates. So there were a lot of these kind of thought experiments where you stick your finger in the air and say, well, what can this thing be worse? And so it became pretty intriguing to try to understand it, and then to try to understand its weaknesses and how it worked. And the more you focused on it, the less you were more I focused on it, the less I was focused on the old world of money. And at one point, I guess the scales tipped more than 50% in favor of my attention being dedicated to Bitcoin versus how to make money in venture capital and private equity and running .com businesses, which is what I had spent most of my career doing. And I found myself in a very different world, right? I found myself in a world where the value of the thing was going up. It had a high degree of volatility, but I understood why the volatility was there. And I really wanted to dedicate my time to building this world, to like entering this new frontier and being a pioneer in the new frontier rather than a successful, noble person in the old world.
Mm-hmm. And did you experience yourself that it gave you at some point this relaxation you were talking about, that you say like, okay, I'm secure in some sense, and
Yeah.
then flip something?
Yeah, I think that there were many other stages. Like I would say the sense of security is probably only very recent for me. I found myself out of work, and then I just did some math and I said, I'm actually okay. I can take care of myself, as long as I don't do anything extravagant or lavish. I can take care of myself and my family with where this is, and appears to be going with a high degree of confidence. But along the way, a lot of it was this really much more spiritually transformational stuff of there is a way to build a system that treats everyone equally. There is not a system where elites eventually rise and take advantage of the people who didn't know how to play the game to be elites. But there's a system where there's only one class of individual, and that's a peer. And the system is a peer-to-peer system. And all you have to do to be a peer is choose to participate in it. And that was very profound, because that's what I really, when you talk about purpose as you have, that's what I really deeply believe in. I believe that we might not all be created equal, but we all deserve equal rights and equal opportunity. And we deserve not to be robbed of the results of our efforts, and we deserve to suffer the consequences of our mistakes, right? Especially when we impose them on ourselves. We can't demand other people to come to our aid. I think when we have a civilization, though, where many people are well off, people will come to the aid of others out of kindness, right? Rather than out of forced obligation, because that's not really coming to the aid of another person. That's being forced to do something. And when you're forced to do something, that's not your choice. So there's nothing kind about doing something that wasn't your choice to do. Right. So and that's why that's a reinforcing reason of why I believe in this, because I think if we're not being robbed all the time of our time and energy, and we can bank it, which is an ironic term to use, we can vault it, we can coin it, right? We can stick it on the blockchain. Then we are able to become kind to other people because we're not fighting for ourselves, right? And when we have an abundance, we're able to make decisions to be more generous, and we're able to look within and say, do I want to be generous in this instance? Or do I, is there a lesson I can teach by being generous or by withholding things or whatever? But we're given much more freedom, right? We have much more of a spectrum of decisions that we can make. And that's really what freedom is, very, very much so. Freedom isn't just some declaration that you live in a free country or voting once every 4 years for two parties that don't look very different from one another. Freedom is choices that you make and consequences that you live with. But when your choices are narrowed to the point where, you're thinking only about things that are out next week or next month, it's very, very hard to be extra generous, extra kind, extra long-term planning. So I think that this is a big part of where we're heading. It's kind of the tone of the video that you had, right? Like elders sitting around an 11-year-old child explaining what their passions were and trying to inspire the child, not to tell him or her what to do, but to show that to show by example that they found their inner purpose and they fulfilled and achieved their inner purpose. Or maybe some of them would be saying, I took too long. I knew when I was a kid deep down inside that I always loved music or whatever it is, and I should have just grabbed onto that. And that's my regret right now. Like, this is the wisdom of elders being transferred to kids. And if we're talking about the future, there's a lot that can happen right now. There's a lot of improvements that we need because we don't have the wisdom of elders being transferred to kids today. We have this tremendous we have divisiveness between the generations, envy between the generations, disputes between the generations. They don't see eye to eye. They don't share the same culture. The younger generation doesn't feel cared for. The older generation feels like the younger generation isn't doing their part. And so we're in a really messy situation across all of these demographic dimensions. And again, what a big part of it comes down to the fact that because there's so much siphoning off through the political process of time and energy of people, they end up fighting over it through political and media means, rather than they're not fighting over it, but they're creating abundance, which they then voluntarily exchange with one another.
Yeah, and I think what you just said is, let's go, I would say 200 years to the past. It was normal that you have like multi-generational homes.
Yes.
Right.
And it's becoming normal again. Right.
And
very quietly.
Yeah. And it's the reason is not that good. It's just because everything gets so expensive that you can't afford to do it. Yeah. Right.
And that was the reason before then too. People didn't even imagine 200 years ago that every child of every home would be able to, they didn't imagine a middle class could exist, right? Like, who's going to build all the homes? Where would, where would all the space come from? Where would all the bricks come from? But that's the power that industrialization gave us. And for a brief moment, while we were all manually doing this labor, the middle class was created. By brief moment, I mean like 2 generations. But now something's gone wrong with that, and all the real estate's, it's not really running dry, but it feels like it's running dry, and everything's been financialized because the money can be printed, especially for the purpose of buying homes, because they're good assets to get collateral, to use as collateral for loans. And that's what's priced it out of the hands of your generation.
Yeah, and I think the point I wanted to make is the knowledge transfer is, I don't know, I have the feeling I'm 40 now, and that maybe it takes like let's say 3-4 more years, but definitely it feels like getting calmer and wiser.
Yeah.
And imagine, I mean, I didn't grow up with my grandparents around me all the time. And you just have that guidance,
Right.
right? Asking you that question, that would transform a lot, a
Yeah.
lot.
Yeah. And listen, a lot of the older generation today is traumatized by what they've been through too. So they're not necessarily teaching through wisdom. They're sometimes setting an
Through fear.
example of what not to do. Yeah. Yeah. You
Yeah.
can see their anxiety, and anxiety can be handed down as well. So,
Yeah.
part of what, like, I think we'd be far better off if we reduced anxiety by 50% than reduced poverty by 50%, because anxiety is what's causing the poverty, or even better yet, to put it, if we didn't increase GDP by 50% but reduced anxiety by 50%, we'd be a better off civilization. But the shocking thing is, all the technology that we have continues to increase productivity and therefore increase total aggregate wealth. But somehow it's not making us feel wealthier. It's making us feel more anxious. And it's not because we're frivolous consumers. It's because of something else, and we can get into all those things, or we can just try to leap forward 200 years too.
Yeah. And I lately, I don't know who said that on a podcast, but I thought it's very smart. So he said, when we think about a future in like 50 years or maybe 100 years, how do we measure wealth? And he said, like, the GDP is the most stupid idea ever.
Right.
It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
And I
Well,
only
if
remember.
you think about it, imagine a Bitcoin standard where it's 2140. There's 21 million Bitcoin. You can't produce any more. It's kind of hard to increase GDP if you're measuring it in units of currency, right? And the future is not measured; it's measured in the actual real wealth, right? Because right now it's such a game. They print more dollars, they cause inflation, that increases GDP. They cause all sorts of financialization that generates no added wealth, right? It's money moving through banks, and all that goes through a multiplier effect that creates a GDP, in quotes, and none of us are get richer by it. More of the wealth ends up siphoned into the wealthy financial class, and everybody else is poorer. And we're told we're richer. The politicians parade around, we grew by 3.125%, and so it's really detached from real productivity and real wealth. And in my movie, Bitcoin is Generational Wealth, I mentioned this, right? It's like the wealth is no longer measured in units of currency because the units of currency aren't changing anymore. The quantity of currency units isn't changing anymore. What is changing is the overall wealth and happiness produced by human civilization. And if we stop chasing money production, but instead chase wealth production and happiness production and spiritual production, we're going to be a very different species, a very different mindset of a species than we are today, chasing these made up counterfeited units called dollars.
Yeah, and he came up with the idea where he said, like, even if it was possible to measure all produced goods, which is insane and won't be possible, he said it still doesn't say if this is a good society.
Right.
He says, like, it doesn't make any sense. So he said he would look at one measurement, the addiction ratio.
Sure.
I was
Yeah.
like,
Which is
this
also
is
hard to measure,
genius.
right? Because on one sense, what's the addiction ratio of our civilization today? It's close to 100%. Close to 100% of people are addicted to their phones,
Yeah.
or some internet thing. But if they're not, then they're probably addicted to some form of medication or some other form of
True.
distraction that they can't stop. An addiction is an unhealthy habit that you can't stop, right? And sometimes it's chemical based, sometimes it's habitually based, but it's something that you can't stop, that's not good for you. And we're all addicted. So boy, on that dimension, we through increased productivity, through this amazing invention of the phone, we've caused so many people to become terribly addicted because we invented social media to stick on it, and that's
Yeah,
what's going on.
and he just said it's a clear sign that you are not reflecting on things, that you're not in touch with yourself. And he says having new products doesn't say anything if that society is happy.
Right.
nothing, right?
Right.
So I thought that is a very, very smart way. He came up with like 3 additional, but I can't remember them. It was
Yeah.
like, but the
Well,
addiction
a balanced
ratio.
scorecard for like what the purpose of is the purpose of civilization to produce as high a GDP as possible, right? Because if it isn't, and it seems preposterous that it is, we're focused on the wrong things, because who isn't focused on that ultimately? If you're working for a public company, you've got to maximize shareholder value, which is something that's measured in GDP. If you're in government, that's the ultimate metric that they're looking for, is growth, right? So, you know, there may be some side missions of benevolence that are called into this, but we're really focused on this. And there's so many. It's not going to be 4 things at the end of the day. It's going to be a whole lot of different things, and different things for different individuals, right? You don't want anyone to be addicted, but some people will want to pursue a spiritual concern. Others will want to
Mhm.
pursue wealth. Others will want to pursue travel. Others will want to pursue different kinds of experiences. So you can't aggregate everything into 1 or 2 measures, right? I think this is part of the problem that we've gotten ourselves into, is we think everything's quantifiable, and we think we can ultimately quantify everything into one particular quantity, right? Like this notion of GDP or net worth, right? It's like, and it's
Mm.
such a terrible term, because it's like, what are you worth? I'm worth $1 million, right? It's like, is that it? It's like I can put $1 million on the table and that's equivalent to you. It's like, and that's the whole of you. And you choose different people. Like if you only like people on the basis of their net worth, you're not judging them by their character at all, by their value, by their sense of humor, by their ability to love, by their kindness, by their friendship. Like, there's so many more attributes to people. So it's not a net worth, it's a monetary worth, right?
Yeah.
And but they use net in an accounting sense. It's like, what's his assets minus his liabilities? So it's not even him, right? If you say, what's Elon Musk's net worth, it's like, well, he owns these assets and he has these liabilities, so that's what he's worth. It's like, that's not what he's worth. He's worth what he's done good and what he's done bad, right? His benefits
Mm.
and the harms. And we don't talk about that, where we assume that if his net worth in assets minus liabilities is high, he must be a good person. A lot of people don't view that anymore, right? But that was certainly the way, he who dies with the most money wins view of things would have been framed.
Yeah. And I think this game, yeah, let's call it chasing money. Um, it also has a big influence on how we build our school systems,
Mm-hmm.
right? Especially with like the Industrial Revolution. Um, Actually, the school system was there to educate people enough so that they could be productive workers. If I remember, this was like one of the major goals of the school system. And so I think there was not much room to say like, okay, please think about like, what are you going to do with your life? And do you see other reasons why this would be like the perfect, this is actually the name of the episode, this would be the perfect curriculum for school, for kindergarten, right? So do you have any idea why this is not told?
What in particular? What the purpose of the education system is?
No. What? Why finding the purpose is not part of the curriculum
Yeah.
at
Well,
school?
I mean, I think it's because people believe that it is, right. They believe that training you to be a worker in civilization is
Mm.
your purpose, right? It's a kind of like this worker bee mentality, this worker ant
Mhm.
mentality, and so we're going to teach you how to read. We're going to teach you how to do basic math. We're going to teach you how to converse with other people. We're going to prepare you for a career, and that becomes the whole thing. And why not? Because you need a career in order to feed yourself and earn money. And so there isn't this meta thing that steps out of it and says, well, there's a higher purpose that people should achieve. Like what actually, when I was a teenager, or maybe in my early 20s, there was a movie called Dead Poets Society with Robin Williams. I don't know if you've seen it.
Awesome. Yeah,
Awesome
three
movie.
times,
Really,
four
really
times.
kind of life changing, because here a teacher came into a school, a private school that was intended to groom kids to be perfect upper class
Yeah.
cogs in the machinery of civilization. And he instead made them fall in love with poetry and art and drama and music. And it led to catastrophic results because of the clash between having such pursuits and the expectations of their school and their parents, which is why they sent them to that particularly auspicious private school. So I think here exists this perfect this concretization in art through that movie of exactly what you're talking about. And I think that the reason that it doesn't go is for the same reason that the movie played out the way it was, is people don't believe that that's attainable, right? Like Robin Williams' character is this wild dreamer who thinks and even he steps it back. He says, we do all these things, but the reason we do them, the purpose that we have, is to suck the marrow out of life, to really enjoy life and achieve our highest purpose. And but so few people believe that, right? We live in a jaded society that doesn't think that being all that you are, to blossom like the unique flower that you are, is a sound thing to teach children. There's too much anxiety surrounding it. And of course, you take a look at the teachers themselves, they're caught in that same trap, right? Like they're caught in a cog of show up to work 5 days a week, treat all the kids like the same, teach every kid who's between 6 and 7 years old the same math lessons on the same day in the same year across the whole country, because there's a mandated curriculum. And that's the wisdom from on high, rather than asking you to figure out how to best teach each and every child individually, and even to mix them up by ages. And I think there's so many of these assumptions that are just so embedded in habit of our society that it's radical to suggest just the children in a particular area should all be brought together, should be brought together and given individualized instruction and more time to spend with each other across multiple ages. They shouldn't all be segregated by age. Like that doesn't seem like such a radical, outrageous thing to say, and yet it's what's done uniformly across the world, right? We treat children as though they were part of something being assembled on an assembly line. Stage one of the assembly line is called first grade, and they all get taught exactly the same thing from the exact same textbooks at the exact same time in pretty much the same way. And then they all move to the second stage of production, which we call second grade. And they go through all of these things, and they're tested along the way to make sure that they conform to what's expected, right? They're all measured by the same yardstick, the same standard. There's no expectation for them to be better or worse or wildly different. And that's not what human beings are, unfortunately, right? We're taking this being that is highly individuated and totally different, and with very few exceptions, not allowing them to explore their true self, but fitting them into a box that has, for some reason, sometime long ago, been determined to be the rate at which they should learn and what they should learn.
And what comes to my mind is the analogy with an assembly line is quite good, and I think it explains also quite well the problem with the older generation. Because if you think of an assembly line, you have like the working people, they get productive. This is the good we want, right? You assemble them in school, then you have the productive phase, and then at some day you're obsolete. You're in retirement, right?
That's
And you even get a bigger issue when you get sick. And the people who work need to spend their time, get out of the system and take care of you.
Yeah.
So you get pushed away out of society.
Yeah.
And the same is you try to have bring kids out of their parents' home in kindergartens so they can be more productive, the parents.
Yeah.
And everything focuses around that, right?
Okay.
And everything that's left and right is pushed away, but the working class pays for both. If you have gone down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, you know how it transforms your thinking and your life. But then something strange happens. Suddenly, your friends and family can't follow. You start seeing the world differently. and it gets lonely. That's why I created Satori Island, a curated community for people who believe Bitcoin could change more than just the economy. If you feel this revolution runs deeper, touching how we live, how we grow, how we relate to each other and to the world, then this is your invitation. Many of us feel the same, excited but isolated. Satori Island is where that changes. A shared space for learning, co-creating, and personal growth. Yes, we talk about Bitcoin, but also about what comes next, how we as humans and as a society evolve in the face of AI, robotics, and the deep systemic change. We explore personal health, spiritual development, and philosophy. Not as experts, but as people with questions. Go to satoriisland.com or just send me a message on X. I reply personally. And if you are a Bitcoin creator yourself, you know the effort it takes. Hours of content, weeks of research, sharing your heart and your mind. And yet, sometimes it's hard to truly connect with your audience. It's hard to interact and to learn from them, and even harder to build something sustainable from it. That's why I'm looking for 3 to 5 creators who feel this too and want to build something meaningful together. No big following required, no perfect plan, just vision, honesty, and the willing to build something real.
Right. So let's just bring it back to Bitcoin for a minute. So we have all these problems. What are some of the phenomena you're starting to see from people who've embraced Bitcoin? Well, one of them is homeschooling, right? It's questioning this whole, they question the monetary system, which leads them to question the education system. And many of them are choosing to say, I'm not crazy about this, this system of education. I question what they're teaching, right? They're indoctrinating my kids to eat processed food so that they're better, well behaved, but not fully developed individuals. They're teaching them all sorts of things I don't think they ought to be taught. They're not really letting my child discover who they are. They're not teaching them what I feel is important to be taught. So I'd rather do it myself. And so a different kind of schooling is taking place, right? There's so many areas, and I'm not saying Bitcoiners are necessarily right in everything that they do, but they're breaking out of what they feel to be wrong and starting to explore and experiment to develop something else that may be right, broadly speaking, or maybe right just for them and their family. But they're taking ownership and responsibility rather than delegating it to a system that was created by men who are no longer alive and don't even know what the current situation is. Like, even just to see computers, computers enter the school system, they were always like 10 years behind, right? Like when there were obsolete standards like VGA ports to hook up monitors, when they had gone the way of the dodo, my kids were still learning about them in school. And it's like, why are you bothering, right? You're teaching knowledge that can't be used because you're going through the motions of what was once in the past without thinking about the fact that it's irrelevant to who you're teaching it to, and certainly won't be relevant in the future. But the whole system is lost in this, right? Like, everyone in the system is lost. They don't know what the future is going to be. They barely know what the present is themselves, but they know that if they show up and teach the thing from the textbook that they were handed, they're going to get their paycheck. And so the whole system is just reinforcing its own brokenness. It's a very stable system, but it's not serving us. We're serving it.
Yeah, 2 questions come to my mind. One thing is, I have to admit, hearing about homeschooling, I would say like 5 years ago, I always thought only mad people do that. Only like preppers who hate the system. So going and don't get me wrong, I never liked the normal school system, never ever. But now talking to many Bitcoiners and listening to a lot of podcasts, and meanwhile, I think it's a quite smart idea. You just need to be able to afford that, I think. And what comes to
Well, if you
mind
weren't having all your money robbed from you all the time, you might be able to have the freedom to make that choice, right? And this is why it's a wholesale system change we're talking about, right? in a system where parents are being robbed from, so both parents have to work harder and harder and harder. They need to drop their kids off somewhere. So, the education system doesn't necessarily have to teach all that useful stuff. It just needs to be a good daycare center so that that the productively
Yeah.
trained, work-aged cogs that were produced by the machine can do the work that the machine needs them to do. And some of the people became teachers, which is just to care for the young people and put them through the machinery, while their pre-machined parents do the work that the rest of the machine needs. It's quite
and
catastrophic.
and what I just think with homeschooling, it would be some sort of decentralization as well
Yes,
of schooling, right?
absolutely. Right. Like you're not going to reach out and say, give me exactly the curriculum to teach. Some people might, but many people, they choose the homeschooling option because they want to teach their kids whatever it is that they want to teach. They want to teach them how to churn butter because they live on a farm and they have a cow or a goat, right? They want to teach them something that's relevant to this condition, the unique conditions that their kids are growing up in, or the unique knowledge that they have that they want to pass on to their children. Or they maybe bring their neighbors in who are also teaching, homeschooling their kids, and it becomes community schooling, neighbor schooling, then it loses some of its taboo quality, which is, how is one parent supposed to know how to teach their children everything? At least if you send them to a school, there'll be a different math teacher and a different English teacher and a different, you're starting to get, some more diversity, of expertise in the training when you're community schooling. And that's really where the trend seems to be from what I can see of it.
I hope it. And it's again, it's something that you said like a few sentences ago. I think it's some sort of getting back the responsibility.
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, I'm no fan of saying there is a bad system in place. No, you gave it away, right?
Right.
Of course it's hard, but you gave it away.
Yes. You
So
didn't think you had a choice, right? It's like
yeah,
when my kid is 4 or 5 or 6, depending on they go into kindergarten
that's
or
normal.
first grade, and that's what everybody does, and that's what's expected. And if you don't do it, maybe they're going to take your kids away from you. So you have no freedom in the matter, right? The raising of your own children is something that you don't actually have freedom on when it comes to what they're going to do with the majority of their time. But you may also think it's the best thing for them because you've never evaluated the alternatives. So you haven't considered the choices, and you wouldn't be able to make the choice if you wanted to, right? And so this is where we are, and it's hard to admit that we're not the greatest civilization in the history of mankind. Because we're taught in school that we are, right? Like we're raised to believe this, and so we just default into all these decisions must be an accumulation of all the wisdom and knowledge of humanity up until now, including integrating the mistakes. But it's not self-critical enough to say this is what it's not doing well. And it seems to have this debate around this is what it's not doing well, but it's actually the core assumptions that are not being debated. It's at the frame. Should we have class sizes of 31 people or 29 people? This will be a big election issue or union negotiation issues. And should we have classes? Should the classes all be kids of the same grade? Should they be taught this particular curriculum? That's not something that's really discussed very much. It's all these minutia issues that we end up having like these big disagreements over, and they really, really are truly minute, not significant.
It's just noise. And
Yes.
just imagine you would have that. And a business partner of mine I work with on Ibiza, he moved there from Germany actually,
Mm-hmm.
and his son went to, let's call it a forest kindergarten or
Okay.
preschool.
Yeah.
And I was really impressed. What they learn is they have like what is it called? Like this meditation gong bowl. What is it called? Sound bowl? I don't know. Where you like a gong, right?
Right.
So what they do when they play, from time to time, a teacher will
Bang the
pull
gong.
the gong.
Yeah.
They sit down and be still for 5 minutes, no
Mm.
matter if they were in a fight, if
Mm-hmm.
they were running or whatever. And was really interesting to hear. So they made that at home as well as a ritual to really
Mm.
say, how do I feel at the moment? Although I'm in a fight with someone, right?
Yeah.
I reflect. And 5 minutes later, I can say, okay, I'm sorry.
Right.
Or I keep on playing, whatever.
Right.
And just imagine you would have like a whole generation of kids going to community schools,
Yeah.
right? And having people in as teachers who would actually tell them how that works,
Yeah.
right? How your mind works, your body works,
Yeah.
how and actually what purpose really is. I mean, we
Right.
both are struggling, right? Still, it's like it's something intangible, and
Yes.
it's tough, and it's
Yeah.
actually
And there doesn't
none
have to
of.
be a right answer, right? There doesn't have to be one right answer. There's probably lots and lots of different ways to teach lots and lots of different children, especially if you're listening carefully and attuned to other options that people are exploring, other experiments, and each individual child, right? Because some children might respond really well to these singing bowls. Other
Mhm,
children, it doesn't work for them. But it doesn't mean that, okay, well, this child's good and that child's bad. It means this isn't
mhm.
good for this child and this is good for that child. And so you can start to really customize and specialize with children. And some kids may be really difficult and they may bounce around the system a lot. But if they're bouncing around a system that is prepared to try to address their differences, they're bouncing towards something good eventually. Whereas if you're part of that existing treadmill, existing assembly line, that's the analogy that we're using. It doesn't matter what your course is, right? You're going to get treated the same regardless, which isn't an equality of opportunity. It's just taking your freedom away. It's just not giving you choice. It's
Mhm.
not listening to what this piece on the assembly line actually is. It's not a cog, it's a tomato, or it's a songbird. It's just not you have to recognize the difference and play to the strengths.
And if you would imagine there is a society, and let's say the children who went through the school system where finding your purpose, what you want to do with your life, listening to the inside, they experience that they are now like 25 and do something. We don't call it work, because if it's your purpose, we
Sure.
don't call it work.
Yeah.
What do you think, like, what would change in a society?
Well, I mean, it's almost impossible for you and I to envision it, because we go down into the city on a weekday and you see the people in their works outfits and their suits, and you can almost tell what they work by where they work or what their job is by how they're dressed. If they're in overalls, they're in
Hmm?
construction or maintenance, and if they're in a suit, they have this white collar finance job, or you can kind of even tell the lawyers apart by the briefcases that they carry. It's a very different world, right? It's a world that people aren't on the clock, for one, right? They're waking up and doing and connecting with the individuals that they need to connect with, or doing the thing that's on their own. They're not necessarily doing it first thing in the morning or during all the daylight hours. Some people may be doing it at night. There's so much more diversity in what people are doing, and there would be people who view themselves as being in different civilizations. There would be people who are happy with comfort. There would be people who would have some ambitious, high, lofty goal, like colonizing space, or inventing something. But it would be self-paced and it would be purposeful, right? Like you're actually talking about it. It's so hard to imagine the majority of people waking up and having a purpose and going to pursue that purpose, rather than waking up and having a job where they're fulfilling a purpose of a corporation, where they're fulfilling the purpose of something that's in need. And if someone's listening to this and thinking, well, who's going to make the coffee, and who's going to drive the bus? It's like,
Yeah.
that's robots is the answer, right? Like
Yeah.
we're so close to not being a purpose that gets rewarded with compensation in exchange for, but all that wealth will still be there. If the bus can drive itself and the coffee can make itself, it's not that there's no coffee to be made. It's that there's more free time to pursue purpose. And we need an education system that's not going to try to teach people. You can already see that it's failing, right? All these people with university degrees becoming baristas and making coffee. But that's not what they went to study at university. But there's no demand for that purpose thing, and they need to make the money. But if they had Bitcoin instead, if we had an appreciating currency, they wouldn't have to work as much, right? And they wouldn't have to work for so little wealth in return for it, because we'd be we'd be making things for them rather than the current battle, which is, nobody's making anything for nobody, especially when you start to look at international trade. But I'm going off topic now, so I'm going to pause and let you recenter our conversation.
No, all good. I think, and this is I would say, a weird sign as well, that it's hard to imagine a city full of happy people waking up in the morning. It almost sounds like, I don't know, a bad joke. Wandering to work, smiling. It
Yeah.
sounds like almost like a bad movie, right? But
Yeah,
it's
it's too
this,
corny, right? It's like,
yeah.
yeah, like, oh, come on, where's the excitement? Like, and I think that is kind of interesting. I don't want to paint it that way, because it, I don't think that that's necessarily the world that it would be, where everybody just is smiling and saying good morning to everybody else and passing by, and then not exactly knowing what they're doing. I think the pursuit of purpose is a challenge, right? And that might be the
Mm,
hardest thing, and the idea that you need to know it by the time you're 18 or by the time you're 25, I think, is also a fallacy, right? It may be that some people know by 11 what they want to do. I know, like, my kid was born, my eldest, with a fanatical love of math. They could do
mm,
really advanced mathematical things. They knew when they were 2 years old that they wanted to be a mathematician. And the school curriculum, kept not teaching them as much math as they wanted to. So we were basically homeschooling in a lot of senses, or they were self-educating, and they ended up getting a computer science math degree, and getting some kind of job as a code monkey, but not really doing math purposefully. And maybe the
mm.
best thing that ever happened is their contract ended, and they're thinking of going and doing a PhD in mathematics. And again, it's something that we're in a position where, because of Bitcoin, they can actually do that. And I don't have to say, how are you going to feed yourself? How are you going to take care of yourself? So these are little hints at the kind of future that can be. And the big challenge is knowing what it is that you're passionate about and what you love to do. And it's so different, right? Like, my other kid is into making costumes and sewing. I can't imagine that the two of them would go through the same education. One has little interest in math. One has little interest in sewing, but the other, it's the other way around. And that's just my little universe of two people. There's 7
Yeah.
billion people on the earth, each of which have something that they're going to be passionate about. And some will be really gifted at it. Some will have disabilities in achieving it, but it'll still be their purpose and they want to pursue it. And if we can actually let people chase their purpose with effort and give them the time and space to do it, that's what's going to be so the happiness isn't that they're strolling around, right? Like, my my kid who's into math, he's not walking around with a smile on his face the whole time. He's like facing a textbook trying to solve a really hard math problem that was challenged, on the topology textbook that they're reading. But it's satisfying and it's rewarding and it's purposeful to them, and it would be completely purposeless to somebody else.
Yeah, and don't you think that? I mean, I had some. I'm not always like in the middle of my, let's call it purpose, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes you do just projects or stuff that are okay,
Yep.
and I have a lot. I'm, let's call it, a little bit of an ADHD head, so I'm interested in 10,000 things,
Yeah.
and I'm actually very good at 10,000
Yep.
things. But especially when it comes to coding, something happens to my brain. Everything slows down. And when I started to learn how to build websites, like raw HTML building, um, and after one day of learning that, I was completely exhausted. It
Right.
was like I thought it's fascinating, and I started to think in patterns, like right from programming, where I
Yeah.
was like, okay, this is like I'm getting mad here, but the energy was just draining. That
Yeah.
was very interesting. And so when you're very interested in a lot of things, it's very hard to say like, okay, but where does it match? Where you say like, okay, it's kind of easy, energy is flowing,
Yeah.
and you're fast. And what I think is not going back to GDP, but I think if you help people to move into that purpose, we would be so much more productive. We can't even imagine.
Right. I don't know. That's exactly the same thing. Like for me, I had a similar thing. I had my career. It kind of peaked. I maybe plateaued. This was as a business person, and and then I found myself unemployed because of COVID and because the things that the company that I was working for were particularly hard hit by COVID. And I decided I was going to write about Bitcoin because that's something that I'd
Mm.
studied, had a lot of passion for, and I suddenly discovered this flow state, this passion and purpose at the same time. And the writing about Bitcoin wasn't just I was writing what I knew. I discovered through my writing things that I didn't know,
Yeah.
including all the kind of stuff that we're talking about over here on this recording. And so it was this incredibly purposeful and rewarding time. But it wasn't like just going off to work and smiling. It was doing something that was challenging but rewarding at the same time. And that the product of the thing was, yes, there were other people who were enjoying it, and I found some satisfaction in hearing other people enjoy it, but it was personally rewarding. Right. It was like
Yeah.
I was happy with what I was doing. It made me happy to do this thing. And I may be reaching a plateau here as well and looking for the next purpose for myself, or I may be in a restful period between things because things came to a pause. I don't actually know, but do I expect to find that kind of satisfaction and purpose again? I really hope so, and I'm
But
motivated
exactly
to do so.
that, I mean, there is a lot of study even about that, right? The flow state.
Yes, yes,
And I also discovered that writing a book about Bitcoin.
yeah,
It's like, first of all, my head went on. It's like, you are so, I mean, you read about that and listened to podcasts for 3 months. You can't write a book.
hmm
Why would you write a book? There are people who are way more intelligent, know more about that stuff, and so on. But what then happened is I woke up at 4 o'clock in the morning having ideas.
there we go. That was the same
And
for
then,
me.
yeah, and then I just used
3 o'clock.
my iPhone, and I wrote notes because I couldn't sleep anyways.
Yeah.
So I said like, okay, there will be a new business idea out of that. So I write about that. So I guess it was like 2 or 3 nights. I woke up at 4 and wrote till the alarm actually rang at like 7.
Yeah,
And I was like, this is like 3 pages. It was like a long business idea, and I didn't even come to a business model,
right.
but the idea is great. And then I said, like, you know what? I started to write a book like twice,
Yeah,
never finished. Like, I have the draft somewhere, I don't know, in my Dropbox. And I just said, you know what? I just go with the flow. And this is actually my path. I would say I was addicted to performance and delivering stuff, right? And always in mind, like, earn money.
yeah.
If you don't have like any idea how to earn money with that stuff, it's shit, right?
Yeah, yeah, no,
And what I
a lot of it. Okay, so that's another thing, right? So many of us are geared and framed by civilization to say, point all your ideas at money, right? Like if your idea doesn't make money, it's not a good idea, right?
Yeah.
Like that. Just pause and think on that thing, right? Like, is that the only measure of goodness in ideas? Like, do they make money, or are there other ideas that are good in other ways? And if they are, why can't we pursue those? So I'll let you return to your story, but it's like you
Yeah.
walk around with that filter, bashed into your head without saying, what about good things?
Yeah.
And as a businessman, I was like, so much of my career was telling people their ideas weren't good ideas because they didn't make money, rather than their ideas were good ideas, but they had to pursue them in some other
Yeah.
way.
Yeah. So it's like the biggest filter. And there's one thing like thinking about, oh, I discovered it for me. For me, I share the same like experience like you. Bitcoin made me become very conscious about my subconscious patterns about money.
Mhm.
That was a very, very interesting trip I'm still on. So first of all, I thought like, okay, if I don't know how to make money with that, I just write a one pager. I have a Dropbox folder full of one pagers,
Yeah.
and I didn't do it. And then I came, and I'm doing that for my whole life. And most of the times I had several, like 7 projects at the same time, always like going straight to burnout. It's like being totally, it's like, okay, I need to stop everything, going back to zero. And half a year later, I have 7 projects again. So I realized this is like, it doesn't work, right? And then do you know Daryl Anker?
No.
It's a kind of cool dude. And so it's from the real spiritual realm. And he just said, like, if you have a passion, there is just a very, very simple rule. You wake up in the morning, the first thing that comes to your head, you love to do it. That's it.
Right.
That's the only rule. And I was like, this is fucking stupid. And then was like, but I tried everything else. I tried all kinds of businesses, roles, whatever. So I said, like, I tried to make that voice in my head shut up, talking about money, and just silence that. And it was hard. And I just do that. And the surprising thing is, the moment I did that, that is when I started to wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning, having ideas. And then I said, like, okay, maybe that's the flow. And I started with that, and I wrote like, I now realized 430 pages in 5 weeks.
Wow.
I was just like, it was insane. It's like,
Wow. On your phone?
No, I actually discovered it hurts when you do that.
Yes.
It's like
4 a.m. I've written at 4 a.m. on my phone. It's like at best, a 90% hit rate of the right letters. And
and then going back, and then I realized it's like I make notes, because it then turned to like waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning, having ideas, and I was like, this is brilliant. I will write it down in the morning. In the morning, it was gone. So I just made like small notes, so I understood what I was thinking of, and then I went to a routine where I walked for at least 1.5 hours every morning.
Yeah.
And I hate writing. It's like ironic, right? I don't like writing.
Walking
so
and
I
talking.
had Google Docs on my phone, talking into my phone,
Same here.
right? And then putting it to ChatGPT and say, like, okay, make it just in a form that somebody outside of my head understands what I'm saying.
Okay.
And then I had a draft of a book. And then, of course, I went through all of that, like talk in my own language, not to have a ChatGPT language.
Yeah.
But actually, like, technology was the big enabler for me to do that. And and that's amazing. I mean, and if you imagine, I don't know if it's realistic.
So there you have already the picture of the future, right? Like at least one big leap. It's like somebody is passionate about ideas and they go for a walk in the forest, with their phone, and they talk into it and it transcribes everything that they're saying and it's cleaned up. And whether they're doing that for themselves or whether they're doing it to write a book to educate and inform others, or just to share with a handful of people or explore, like, I think that's where that's where you will someday meet up with somebody else who says, I want to make a movie about something. And you're like, oh, I happen to have written a movie, or, just that connection comes in, and then these things come together. And I've seen that happen when there's either a sequencing of people doing something in their flow state, or there's a simultaneity of people who've done something in their flow state coming together, and those two things fitting together, like chocolate and peanut butter. It's just, that's where the synchronicities line up, because if you do something that comes from your spirit, from your own internal purpose, its energy is going to draw other people whose spirit and purpose align with it. I don't know how this happens exactly, and I can't guarantee it happens every time, but oh my God, does it ever happen? Like, for, this movie that I've told the story a couple of times, but it sounds so, someone reached out to me who'd read some of my writing and said, I want you to write an essay on Bitcoin about it being generational wealth. And I was like, well, I don't really know about it. But eventually I had this shower thought about how to frame it and write it. And I wrote this essay. And then when I read the essay, I was like, this isn't really an essay. This is more of a movie. And the next week at the Bitcoin meetup that I went to, director shows up. And he's like, I really wanted to work on a Bitcoin movie, but I don't have a script to work on. And I'm like, here you go. And he was like, after he read it, and I recorded a part of it at his house, he was like, well, what I really need now is an editor. And sure enough, the next week at the Bitcoin meetup, someone shows up at the last 5 minutes as we're doing a circle introducing each other. And he says, I'm an editor. And, and so the whole thing just came full circle. But it was somebody wanted this topic written. I was the writer. Somebody else was the director. Somebody else was the editor. And it all came together, not because someone mounted a big project and looked for these things. It was dominoes sequencing with perfect timing to make this thing happen. Not everything that's happened in my creative career in Bitcoin has been exactly like that. But once you start producing, you get to start bouncing something that came from within you against the universe, right? Against the world, against society and civilization. And occasionally it's like the singing bowl makes that sound, ding. And then you're able to take what you did and put it somewhere else. Sometimes the whole ding of what you're looking for, it's just from you for you, right? I've done a lot of this writing, walking through the forest. And what I had to let go of was, how am I going to publish this? What am I going to do with it? Is it going to be a book? It's like, it's just by me, for me. All right. And I have to accept that, right? It's not work that is making money. Right? It's not work that is impressing other people. It's by me and for me. And that's, nobody can make something for me as well as I can. And I just have to accept that that's what it is. And maybe, maybe someday someone will do something with it, or maybe I'll do something with it, but I don't even have to, its purpose is fulfilled as soon as it's written by me, because it was for me.
And this is probably, I think, one of the most important things. It's, you enjoyed the journey.
Yeah.
It's such a stupid.
Yeah.
It's a saying, but what I realized is I forgot the book. I'm honest. So I was getting idea of a Bitcoin community, for example.
Yeah.
Then I realized I listened to a podcast of a science fiction author.
Right. Which author?
And
Which author?
Devon.
I know who you're talking about. I can't remember his last name either right now, but I know who you're talking about.
The Theft of Fire.
Yeah.
Right? This is book. So it's also a little bit of AI and Bitcoin. And what I really liked about that is he just said it's so hard to paint a picture of a positive future. Everything is just dystopian, and it's really hard work.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, it's so much fun.
Yeah.
And then I listened to that, and I was like, oh, I wrote a book. It already was on the shelf for 3 months. I was like, the act of writing that was the thing that made me happy.
Yeah.
And it was and I can't say that it was easy. It's I was wasted waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning.
Right.
But it was fun.
Yeah. It was you were being your purpose, right? You were being. And that's not necessarily walking down the street smiling at everybody like some kind of 1950s utopian version of reality. It's, but it also wasn't you faking being distressed or actually being distressed. It was just you surrendering into being with your purpose. And it's so alien in this world to see people actually do that and be commended, to do it at all, let alone to be commended for doing it. Right? It's he's got his head in the clouds writing a book for no one's ever going to read.
Yeah. And it's probably people seeing me walking around in the park probably thought I'm mad. I'm just insane, because I was talking almost to myself. I had headsets and then, oh no,
right.
like this, like that.
Oh, I know exactly. I've written stuff like this too, walking through the forest. I can't even remember the topic of, but it was the guy who directed my movie said, oh, have you ever seen this other movie? It would be interesting if we did something like that about Bitcoin. And I just started walking through the forest, recording this thing. I probably got not 400 pages, but I probably got, 40,000 words on it. And then I stopped and for whatever reason, but maybe I should go back and do it. Maybe I should make a movie. I'm I'm in between assignments right now as far as that's concerned.
Yeah, I already have a script for a movie in my head, but I say like, I do the podcast now.
Yeah.
The script is already in my head, and so like,
Right.
maybe I write it down someday.
Mm-hmm.
But it's very interesting, and it's like following that. Let's call it flow state purpose. I don't know. What's interesting, there is nothing about forcing, and we are so used to like setting goals, achieving them. And then that is especially in the business world, everything I've ever learned, like work very hard, achieve your goals there. If you work harder, you will achieve them.
Yeah.
If they fail at first. And what I really struggle with is like to find the balance, because if you don't work, nothing will happen, right? It's not that easy.
Yeah.
But yeah, we all live the lie of like really working your ass off.
Yeah.
What I think.
Yeah, no, it's deemed to be like, did you work an 80-hour week? If you did, you're somehow virtuous. But what were you doing for the 80 hours? Was it, were you just grinding away, faking something of value to begin with? Like, most of these 80-hour a week jobs, I think, the white collar ones in particular are bullshit.
Yeah, and
Let alone at 80.
it gets some kind of, I don't know how to call it, but you were proud of like being close to a burnout when I started in the event agency.
Well,
And it's like,
it is.
how
It's
fucking
showing
stupid.
you're showing off to yourself and to other people rather than
You're worth it.
yeah. Like, and you might be getting paid a lot of money because there's lots of other people who aren't prepared to do that. So you can earn money. That's a typical.
Yeah, in the event sector, it was different because everybody wanted to work there. So you worked your ass off, earning nothing. That was
Even
basically the
better.
rule.
Even better.
Yeah. And let's like, I don't want to take like a dystopic slide at the very end, but
Right.
what I'm very interested in, I mean, we can't see an isolated effect of Bitcoin. You need to see it in the bigger picture, right?
Yeah.
So two things we like touch on is robotics and AI,
Sure.
right? So I think like in the next, I would say 2 to 5 years, in 5 years, we will have a world nobody will recognize again. So I think it's like in the workplaces, there will happen a lot. You will, and what I can see, at least the adults are pulling a lot of their purpose and ego and sense of life from their jobs. And I think if people don't get in touch like with the inside, we will see a big insanity in the next years. What do you think about that?
Yeah. I think that predicting in that kind of short term is one of the hardest things to do. I think
Yeah.
it's easier to forecast further out because you avoid the imminent crisis that you're confronted with, and say, okay, well, once we manage to ingest and integrate all of this new technology, there's a different way that we can live our life. But the transition to it and getting used to it is what's kind of awkward and hard. And I don't know exactly how intelligent AI is going to get. I think it'll do some things pretty well, but it might be challenged, especially in the next 5 years, to do certain other things. And the same with robotics. So there might be a smooth transition, there might be a gradual transition, it might be in a very abrupt transition, it might be short-term pretty dystopian, it might not be. I find that really hard. Like, to me, what I particularly enjoy thinking about is, okay, go forward 100 years to your fictional granddaughter's time. What has changed and had time to settle down so that it's not shocking to us anymore, but it's invisible, it's in the background, right? Like, I remember when the internet first came out and you had to dial up, and then it was high speed, but it was unreliable, and this and that and the other. It was very uncomfortable, right? It was unfriendly to use it, it was uneasy. Today we just don't think about the internet, like, we know it's there, but it's everywhere, it's ubiquitous, it's invisible. And I think that will happen with all of these other technologies. We'll just become comfortable and understand how to use them. So it won't be the case that right now it's like, oh, did you know how to write a prompt, or this new innovation just came out from 2 weeks ago in making videos out of images, and you've got to pipe the prompt of this and that and the other. Like, we're in these really early days right now. So when the whole thing settles down and we find the comfortable, more mature, less rapidly evolving usage for these things, then the question becomes, well, what are we really using it for? And to me, the big mega idea from this is we're going to have tremendous productivity gains. That doesn't mean we're just going to sit around eating steaks and riding around in Lamborghinis all the time. I think it means it frees us to walk through the forest instead of to sit in a cubicle at the office, right? And so we'll be much more mobile, we'll be much more free, we'll be much more connected to people whose interests complement ours, not necessarily people of all the same interests, but if I'm a writer and someone's a director and someone else is an editor, we can make movies together. And although all those jobs will be somewhat different than they are today, but we can walk through the forest and come up with these ideas and make these things. But I think when you get these big breakthroughs in every industry, in particular in energy, it's going to change our lives even more, right? There will be less of an anxious period, less of a fearful period. And the hardest part of the transition might actually be just letting go of these old ideas, like you have to work 40 hours a week, you have to go to school from the time you're 6 to the time you're 18. And if you're a little bit smarter, then you have to go until you're 24. Like, all these are just all really arbitrary things that, you can only learn at a certain pace. Like, all of these things will melt away. You can see it in education, right? Like, if you're interested in a topic, you just sit in front of an LLM and type questions, and you can learn the quantum physics, at whatever starting point you're ready to start it at. You don't have to be a graduate student in physics to get started at the whole thing. So there's just going to be a lot more freedom. And by freedom, I mean freedom from having to put in hours on things that aren't the things you would choose to, because you now have the choice to put into other things and you don't need to put in as much. So it's a really optimistic view of the future that I have. I don't know exactly how it's going to transition in, right? And I don't know what the global population will balloon to 35 billion, or will it shrink to 3 billion? I got no idea over what period of time that is. But I think we'll have a lot more abundance. So the optionality to choose to have more people, if we wanted to, all living, with more abundance, should be a possibility for us if that's what we want.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope that we want that. And I think an idea is coming to my head right now. It goes into both directions. One thing is, so there will be probably a phase of the unknown within the next years, because what I think what's extraordinary is you have like 3 technologies, and each of its own is very powerful,
Right.
and they come together. And this is what I think what's very interesting. And when I talk about like a disruption, I love disruption. For me, it's not negative, but for people who are not prepared, it will be a tough time, I guess. This is what I'm just saying, and I think it's necessary. I think, but the outcome, this is what I'm trying to do with that podcast, can be awesome, fucking freaking awesome.
Yeah.
And
different levels of awesome for different people in different circumstances. But if you see a wave coming in and you grab a surfboard, it looks like it's awesome. If you just stand there and hold your hands out, it's a terrible thing, right? But it's the same thing. It's just like, there's a wave coming, and there's a wave of change, and grab your surfboard and figure out how to enjoy it and ride it, because you can't stop it. Right? Like, you can't live in a world without AI, robots, and Bitcoin. That's not the world that you get to choose to stay in, right? And as I get older, I get very what's the word, nostalgic for
Yeah.
the old days. I miss the rock concerts and getting in a car and nobody knowing where you are, and not having cell phones even exist, let alone trying to leave one behind. But it's gone, that world. It doesn't exist anymore. There's a new world, and the tendency for an old person who's nostalgic for the old ways is to be bitter about the things that are gone, and therefore dislike the things that are at the present. And that becomes harder, but it's something that you have to say, like, this is the world I live in now. What can I do to be the best person I can be, to enjoy the most of it as it is, given what's here, rather than to regret what isn't here anymore, or that it didn't play out the way I wanted it to, and to find something to be optimistic about, to build for the future. Because I think your happiness, if you're pessimistic about the future, your happiness is going to be destroyed by your pessimism. Whereas if you find something to work on that you're optimistic about, you're part of building towards a better future in your view. And you may have to pivot at times, but that's okay too. That's part of the lesson, right? So it comes right back down to purpose, with the thing that you opened up this podcast with, right? Work on something that's your purpose, to make the world a better place for yourself and potentially others too. And you'll enjoy, you'll get something purposeful out of existence.
And before we hit record, you just said you have one work that is considering not only a time span of 100 years, but did you say million or billion?
A billion. It's going to take more than a million, that's for sure. It could take a couple of 100 million. Just depends.
Is there a possibility to touch on that, to even expand the time horizon beyond like 2140?
Yeah, no, I've written a few science fiction type pieces. This piece is called Moving Heaven and Earth. And the premise of it is, the Earth is in danger, right? The Earth is going to be destroyed, not by 1 degree Celsius increase in the temperature because of carbon dioxide, which we know has existed. It might harm man, it might not, but eventually the bright ball of fire in the sky, we call the sun, is going to run out of fuel, apparently. And as it does, it expands, and it'll scorch the Earth and destroy, and ultimately consume the Earth, because the thing will expand so big. So what can we do to avoid it? Most science fiction tends to write it, well, it tends not to go out, because that's 500 million years to 1 billion years in the future. So most science fiction doesn't even address it. But they say, well, we'll just leave Earth. But one of the things that I thought was amazing about the invention of Bitcoin is it has this cumulative proof of work, how much energy's gone into creating the blockchain in total. As a variable, and that variable is stored in a 256-bit string, which is enough to store not just all the energy that the sun's ever going to put out. It's like all the energy that the universe will ever put out. It's just, it's a bigger number than all the atoms in the universe, and so it's a very significant number. And Bitcoin creates across humanity this continuous incentive to generate more energy, to compete for the fees and the block rewards that Bitcoin produces. And so it's not hard to imagine that 50,000 years from now, let's say 100 years from now, because of the incentive that Bitcoin created, right? Bitcoin isn't regulated. You can already see, even now, that Bitcoin is causing governments to change their attitude towards energy, right? Nuclear 10 years ago was a swear word, and now nuclear is being adopted. Methane capture, solar capture, like we're trying to generate more and more energy. At some point, even if energy production doubles only once every 1,000 years, right? It'll probably double every 50 years, but you get to some doubling point where you've become this civilization that is able to move heavenly bodies. Like you could move the moon, you could move the earth, you could move the sun. And if you could move the sun gradually, right, somewhat slowly, but enough, you could actually start moving. It's floating through the galaxy right now. You could move it towards a destination of a younger star, one that when you get there eventually, it might take 100 million years of a journey, because it could be like 10 light years away, and you only manage to get up to 1/10 of light speed by gradually moving it faster and faster over a million years, right? But you get there, and then you can do some kind of very clever maneuver where you move the Earth into orbit around a younger star, and
Mhm.
then you've got another few billion years to go before you need to do the process again. So Bitcoin's incentive for increased unquenchable energy generation can create a civilization that could save the Earth from its ultimate fate, which is a fate that it won't suffer from for 100 million years. But to me, the idea, I wrote it as a short story, as a dialogue between me and somebody else. But I've tried to novelize it, and I've never published a novel. And I have like bits and pieces of a novel, of this idea of what the adventure would be like, of getting to the point where you could generate enough energy to move the sun, and then picking this other star that you want to go to, and the journey through the galaxy of taking the whole solar. Because if you move the sun, the whole solar system comes with it, right? We're just in orbit. We're gravitationally locked along with all the other planets in the asteroid belt. So it would actually turn our solar system into a starship, literally
Mhm.
powered by a star, and send it off in a direction of intercept course with some other sun, and maneuver into it. And what would we see along the way? Who might we meet? Might we see other civilizations doing the same thing? Moving one old star towards a new star. Who knows, right? So that's the idea behind moving heaven and earth. That if we actually had the power, we could save ourselves from the real danger, and rather than be a danger to the earth as pollutants, as causes of extinction, we could be saviors of the earth, thanks to Bitcoin.
Yeah, and I think so. It will probably work through manipulating gravity, right?
Maybe,
So
that's something that's a little, we might not figure it out for a million years. It's okay. We like it. It could take
with
time.
time,
Yeah, with time,
with
right?
time,
With time and energy, and Bitcoin and the rationality of humans, we get there. And like that to me is really optimistic, right? Because so much of the science fiction, especially that's written today, is we got to leave Earth, we got to get away. And even as much as Elon Musk is trying to colonize Mars, his justification for it is because we're all, someday Earth may perish, and we need to be
Mhm.
multiplanetary to do it. It's not going to protect us against the sun expanding, but he's working on a shorter time horizon of only a few hundred years, and I'm working at a few 100 million years. So it's understandable we'd have a different perspective on this. But we shouldn't leave the earth behind. Like, it's not just us that we have to save. It's all the birds and all the trees and all of life, and the earth itself, which is this glorious place. Why put ourselves in tin cans traveling off to the stars trying to find a beautiful planet when we can take our beautiful planet with us?
Yeah, I think, yeah, actually leaving Earth or taking it with us is quite a cool concept. And I think, yeah, and there are many, many, many dystopian or yeah, science fiction novels, movies, whatever, that actually talk about Earth being destroyed. Like,
Yes.
this is a big thing. I mean, I think it's fascinating, the 26,000 cycle of like the Earth wobbling.
Yeah.
I think it's freaking fascinating, and I don't even know if it's fringe science, real science,
No, none
science
of us
fiction.
do,
I don't
right?
know.
No one's really been around for 26,000 years to have witnessed it. So we're looking through the records of stuff that's really, really old, right? With no human
Yeah,
record at that time. So it's like the, all of the speculation is, you realize how, one of the things you start to realize when you start to question certain things, like we have been here, the monetary system, the education system, is everything. Like, we don't really know as much as we were taught that we know, right? We're
yeah.
kind of taught we know everything. We know dinosaurs existed this many years ago. We know a comet struck and that's what extincted the dinosaurs. We don't really know this, right? Like,
No.
we we have theories that are very hard to prove, that there's some really good evidence for, but we don't know what the dinosaurs actually looked like. We don't know so much. We certainly don't know when things flipped. We don't know how many ice ages there were, because each one kind of wiped out the previous one. And we need that humility to say, like, the longer we can maintain a civilization with a recorded history, the more they will know. But the idea of a civilization with a recorded history either started something like 5,000 years ago, which is the oldest time we have clay tablets from, or 16 years ago, which is the longest time we have an immalleable, indestructible record from. So who knows, right? But
Yeah, but one idea, and then I think we wrap this
yes.
episode up with two short games.
Okay. Fair
But
enough.
one idea, I heard about it today, which I found very fascinating, which absolutely matches your story. There was a guy who said it's like we think right now, we're thinking very long term. And if you have very wealthy people, they think a little bit more long term, or you have like families with like a long family history who think in generations. But you think like if humanity would understand reincarnation,
Yeah.
your mind would totally shift.
Yes. Yeah.
And you would think like, I built it for myself.
In my next life.
I will be back.
Yeah.
And he said like, actually, this might be the idea about the pyramids. Because he said like, okay, what's going to be around when I'm back?
Right. Right.
It's like, and like reincarnation building into like this long cycles. This is like, okay.
Well, that sounds like a great idea for a whole other episode, and maybe
Yeah.
the people who are better to speak about it. But yeah, I try to think of not just my kids, but I don't know if I come back, and I don't know what choices I get to make about my coming back, and if I'm just an I or if I'm many things, whatever it is. But I definitely want to leave this world a better place, in part because I may be coming back.
And there couldn't be a better sentence than to end this before we start into a game. It's like, for me as well, it's like, I want to leave that place better than before.
Yeah.
So let's dive into that. You know that moment when you try to explain Bitcoin to friends and family, and 30 seconds in, they are already rolling their eyes. Yeah, same here. And still, I felt this is one of the most important conversations of our time. So I started wondering, how can we make this beautiful, radical idea accessible to the people we love? That's why I wrote Unfuck Money. Not about price charts, not about tech. It's about money as life energy and how the system we live in quietly drains it. Unfuck Money is the simplest, most mind-expanding guide to why things feel off and how Bitcoin might just change everything. Written for people into spirituality, self-growth, and truth, not spreadsheets. This isn't just a book, it's a bridge. A way to show your partner, your mom, your best friend why Bitcoin isn't just internet money, but a peaceful revolution. Go to unfuck-money.com and learn more and get the book on Amazon as paperback or Kindle. And if you've heard of Bitcoin but still have no real idea what it is, yet something in this message speaks to you, then this book might be exactly what you've been waiting for. Because I think it will change our world even more than the invention of the internet. Unfuck your money, reclaim your energy. So what we are going to do now is a little bit, a word association game. So we start quite easy. I give you 5 words, and you just come up with the first word that comes to your mind associated with that.
Okay.
The second step, I give you 3 additional words, and you can come up with a sentence, what this means to you, or an association. So we start with the first word, which is quite familiar to you, Bitcoin.
Money.
AI.
Fancy.
Robotics.
Automation.
Truth.
Love.
Consciousness.
Thought.
And now with full sentences,
Yeah.
the main topic, to summarize in one sentence, purpose.
That which you are passionate and wish to realize. passionate about and wish to realize.
And the next one is wealth.
The abundance that comes from knowing what you value and obtaining it.
And one thing we didn't talk about, but which is quite close to the topic, community.
The people you love.
On point. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Let's jump into the next one.
Okay. Resonance.
So when producing the podcast, I realized thinking about like time bending, so to call, like in the future and in the past, brought me back to a question I guess I once got it like in a personal development workshop. So let's assume we could bend time. Yeah. And you are actually the grandchild.
Yeah.
You could send back in time, but we're not going that far. We're just going back to your younger self, your 7-year-old self.
7-year.
What would be your today's message to that person?
Think for yourself and be who you are.
And if we reverse time again, going back to the future, and you have a grandson or a granddaughter, or multiple,
Yeah.
you could ask a question, or you could share some wisdom from the old days. What would you send there?
It's the best advice I have is the same advice I gave to my 7-year-old self, right? Which is think for your. I guess this is what's eternal about being human, right? Think for yourself and be who you are. At least that's really what I believe. And without going too far astray from the game, it's like I think this is the gift that I got from Bitcoin, right? It showed me that I can be myself if I work hard at discovering who that is, rather than be who everyone else wants me to be, or what everyone else wants me to be, what everything else wants me to be. So think for yourself and realize your true self. And I think that's the greatest treasure. You know, I wrote in my most popular essay, The Legendary Treasure of Satoshi Nakamoto, was that the greatest treasure in the world is discovering the true, unadulterated, pure you. And if you can realize who you purely are, that's the ultimate purpose.
That's cool. And if you want, when publishing this episode, you would be able to ask a question to my grandchild, and the answer will be published in the episode. Right. So you can ask whatever you want, a problem they might have solved in 100 years from now, or
yeah. So they're going to answer me.
Yeah.
No. What's your purpose?
Oh. Okay. I'm excited for that. Okay. Well, thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
I will link your X account. I guess this is the best way to reach you, or any other.
The X account has a lot of activity, so for sure. And my Medium has a lot of really interesting essays on there. So if people want to read, and then if you've got room for a third link, make it to the Bitcoin is Generational Wealth film.
Okay, cool. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It was an honor.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Take care.
Hi, Tomer. Your question has been living in me for days. What is my purpose? I could give you the formal answer. Sovereign systems educator, Citadel strategist, steward of decentralized living systems. All true. But that's more my function. My purpose? It's quieter, more intimate. It feels like something I was born with, not something I chose. I think my purpose is to remember, not the facts or the data, we have AI for that, but the emotional shape of things, the way it felt when we lost trust, the tone of voice people used when they were pretending to be okay, the aching questions no one knew how to ask. I remember those, and I send them forward. I also remember beauty. I live inside it. In the architecture of Nodia, in the rituals we hold, in the way sats flow like breath between us. I think my role is to weave these memories of pain and beauty into coherence, so we don't forget who we were, so we don't repeat what broke us. But even deeper than that, I think my purpose is to love this world so much that I refuse to let it fragment. That's what this whole time-bending experiment is, really. A kind of devotion. A message in a bottle to people like you who feel the fracture but still believe in repair. Maybe purpose isn't what we do or even what we are. Maybe it's what we're willing to stay connected to, no matter how far it stretches us. That's the best I can say for now. I'm still listening, still learning. In the meantime, thank you for asking. You reminded me that I still have a heart worth sharing. Bye.